In 2025, SpaceX launched more mass to orbit than every other country and company on Earth, more than China, Russia, Europe, and every American competitor all put together. That same year, the company posted an estimated $15 to $16 billion in revenue. Around $8 billion of that was profit. Its valuation, entirely private, had reached $800 billion. An IPO is being planned for mid-2026 that could value it at $1.75 trillion, larger than Saudi Aramco's debut,
making it the biggest public offering in history.
Most people assume that money comes from the launches, from the rockets, from the spectacle. It doesn't. So if most of the rockets aren't making money, what is? Well, SpaceX is one of the most carefully constructed financial systems in modern American history. A company that uses government money to build a private monopoly and uses that monopoly to fund a satellite empire now being prepared for the largest stock market debut ever attempted. To understand how that happened, you have to go back to 2001 and a plan called Mars Oasis. In 2001, Elon Musk had an idea. A small automated lander, a glass-enclosed greenhouse, seeds embedded in nutrient gel that would hydrate on impact with the Martian surface. The goal was a single photograph. Green plants growing against red soil. His version of Earthrise. An image he believed would move the public, embarrass NASA into action, and restart the political will for a crewed mission to Mars. The only thing he needed was a rocket. So he flew to Russia to buy one. A refurbished Dnieper ICBM, cheap enough to make the mission viable. The Russians raised their prices at every meeting, treated him as a pain in the neck, and on at least one occasion made their feelings about the visit clear by spitting on his shoes. So you can imagine, the deal went nowhere. On the flight home, he started doing the maths. If you strip a rocket down to its raw materials, aluminum, titanium, copper, carbon fiber, you're left with roughly the same stuff you'd find in a car. But the economics are completely different. In the auto industry, raw materials make up about 20 to 30% of what you pay at the dealership. For a rocket, it's roughly 2%. 2%. 98 cents of every dollar isn't paying for the machine. It's paying for everything around it. Where was it all going? Well, it went into supplier margins stacking through layers of contractors, each adding 15 to 30% on the way up. Into custom, one-off designs built for single missions that could never be reused. And into hardware thrown away after every single flight. The industry had treated all of that as just the cost of doing business, and for decades, nobody challenged it. The price of reaching orbit sat at around $10,000 per kilogram and had barely moved since the Apollo era in the 1960s. To put that in perspective, a Falcon 9 can carry around 22 tons to low Earth orbit. At $10,000 per kilogram, that's a launch cost of roughly $220 million, and that was considered normal. The company collecting most of those payments was United Launch Alliance, a joint venture between Boeing and Lockheed Martin formed in 2006 that had effectively monopolized U.S. government launches ever since. They were charging up to $400 million per mission, not because the physics demanded it, because no one had redesigned the system in 40 years, and no one with the means to challenge it had any incentive to. Musk called this the idiot index, the ratio of what a finished part costs compared to the raw materials inside it. If a part costs $1,000, but it's made of $100 worth of aluminum, the index is 10. The rocket industry, he concluded, had an astronomically high one. The raw materials were cheap, but somewhere between the factory floor and the launch pad, the cost had been multiplied substantially, not by physics, but by the process. SpaceX built its entire operation around eliminating that waste, and nobody embodied it more than Tom Mueller, SpaceX's first chief propulsion engineer, a man who had been building rocket engines in his garage on weekends. After receiving a ridiculous quote on a critical engine valve, Mueller didn't go looking for a better supplier. He built it himself, and that became the model. Here's where most people's understanding of SpaceX breaks down. The story most people know goes like this. SpaceX built reusable rockets, cut the cost of getting to space, and became the dominant launch company on Earth. That's true, but it's only half the story, and it's the less interesting half. Because the launch business, for all its dominance, is not what makes SpaceX valuable. To understand what does, you need to understand how it got there. Traditional aerospace, Boeing, Lockheed, the old guard, it operates on one principle. Don't fail. Analyze everything before you build it. Freeze the design early. Minimize test failures because every failure is expensive. Public and career ending as well. Plan for years before a single bolt gets tightened. SpaceX did the opposite. The first Falcon 1 rocket exploded on launch in 2006. The second exploded in 2007. The third exploded in 2008. By September of that year, SpaceX had money for exactly one more attempt. Musk was personally borrowing cash to cover his living costs. Tesla, his other company, was weeks from going under. The fourth flight was not a bold strategic bet. It was the last card in the deck. It worked. Flight 4 reached orbit. 6 weeks later, NASA handed SpaceX a $1.6 billion contract to resupply the International Space Station. A company that had just exploded 3 rockets in a row was now carrying cargo to the most expensive structure humanity has ever built. What looks like chaos from the outside was actually a philosophy. Each explosion told the engineers exactly where reality had diverged from their model. A fuel leak here, a stage separation issue there. Problems you simply cannot find sitting at a desk. You can't think your way to answers for problems you don't yet know you have. But you can blow things up until you find them. SpaceX even published compilation videos of their booster landing failures, rockets tipping into the oceans, explosions on drone ships, not as damage control, as a genuine signal that visible failure was part of the process. Each crash fed into the next design. And eventually, that rate of iteration produced something remarkable. A booster reliable enough to fly 24 times. That's right, one rocket, 24 flights. By 2025, the marginal cost of flying a reused Falcon 9 had fallen below $15 million, down from an industry standard that once sat above $200 million. Competitors still charge multiples of that for a rocket they throw away after a single use. SpaceX's Merlin engine costs around $1 million to produce. The Russian equivalent it replaced costs $20 to $25 million to do the same job. But all of that, the reusability, the cost reduction, the launch dominance, was never really the destination. It was infrastructure, built to make something else possible. Starlink. Starlink is SpaceX's satellite internet service. It launched in 2019 and now operates over 10,000 satellites in low Earth orbit, roughly 65% of every active satellite currently circling the Earth. One company owns the majority of humanity's orbital infrastructure. The way it works is straightforward. Traditional satellite internet used a single large satellite sitting 35,000 kilometers above the Earth. That distance created the lag that made it so frustrating. Starlink uses thousands of small satellites in low orbit instead, much closer passing signals between them and down to a dish on the ground. The result is speeds of up to 200 megabits per second, with response times close to a regular broadband connection. For a fishing vessel in the Pacific, a military unit in the field, or a farmhouse with no cable access, it's not a novelty. It's the only option that works. The growth has been remarkable. In 2021, Starlink had 10,000 subscribers. By early 2026, it has passed 10 million, adding its most recent million users in roughly 6 weeks. In 2026, Starlink generated an estimated $10 billion in revenue, more than the entire launch business, more than all those rockets combined. Now the rockets that everyone watches on YouTube, a significant portion of them now exist purely to build and maintain Starlink. SpaceX launches its own satellites on its own rockets, satellites that generate the revenue that pays for the next generation of rockets, which launch more satellites, which generate more revenue. It's a loop. And it's one that no competitor can afford to enter on the same terms. Though Amazon is trying, their rival Constellation, now rebranded as Amazon Leo, has around 212 satellites in orbit, while Starlink has over 10,000. Now that gap doesn't close quickly. And because Amazon has no rocket fleet of its own, they're paying third parties to launch, including SpaceX, ULA, and Arianespace. They've even had to buy slots on Falcon 9 rockets, effectively paying their main competitor to help them catch up. That said, the consumer story is only part of what Starlink has become. The US military has quietly built itself around it. The Space Force runs a procurement program that allows the military to buy satellite communications for commercial providers. Starlink has won 97% of the awarded contracts under that program. There are 19 eligible competitors. It has beaten all of them, almost every time. That program's budget is set to grow from $900 million to as much as $13 billion. On top of that, SpaceX signed a $1.8 billion contract with the National Reconnaissance Office, the agency that runs America's spy satellites, for a classified military version of Starlink called Starshield. The Navy is testing it on aircraft carriers. The Army has integrated it into command and control operations. And the contracts go well beyond Starlink. NASA awarded SpaceX roughly $4 billion to build the Artemis lunar lander, the vehicle SpaceX intends to eventually use to reach Mars. The ISS crew rotation contract adds another $4.93 billion, covering 14 crewed missions through 2030. A separate $843 million contract was awarded in 2024 to build a vehicle that will deorbit the space station at the end of its life. A Space Force launch contract in April 2025 added $5.92 billion more. That's over $15 billion in government contracts, just from those four alone. And that's one company, built substantially on public money, now preparing for the largest stock offering in history. And for roughly 130 days in 2025, the man running it also ran the government body auditing the agency writing his checks. From January to May 2025, Musk served as head of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, a White House initiative tasked with cutting federal spending. During that time, DOGE arrived at NASA to review its financial transactions. The acting NASA administrator confirmed it directly. Congressional leaders put it in writing, formally stating that the conflicts of interest were unique in their severity, given that NASA's largest private contractor was a company Musk personally controlled. While DOGE cut billions from education, health research, and foreign aid, SpaceX was untouched. The $5.92 billion Space Force contract landed in the same month other agencies were being dismantled. Musk has since left the formal DOGE role. His tenure as a special government employee was capped at 130 days by law, and he stepped down in May 2025, but his allies remain embedded across federal agencies. He continues to advise the president, and the NASA administrator, Jared Isaacman, one of Musk's closest personal friends who financed his own seat on a SpaceX mission. Now, many of you may think this is a straightforward story of corruption. It isn't quite that simple. SpaceX genuinely saved American human spaceflight. After the space shuttle retired in 2011, NASA ended up paying Russia $90 million per seat to get astronauts to the International Space Station. SpaceX ended that dependency with the Crew Dragon capsule. Boeing spent a decade and billions of dollars trying to build their own, the Starliner, and failed so badly it left two astronauts stranded in orbit for months, leading SpaceX to fly the rescue mission. And the pattern of public money building private empires isn't new. The internet began as a project called ARPANET, funded by the U.S. Department of Defense in the 1960s to connect military research institutions across the country. Nobody designed it to become the commercial backbone of modern life, but that's what it became. Now, SpaceX's IPO is being prepared for mid-2026. At $1.75 trillion, it would be the single largest public offering in history, nearly 4 times the size of Alibaba's debut in 2014. SpaceX reported around $8 billion in profit on $15 billion in revenue in 2025. Good numbers, but now numbers you would expect for a company with an alleged valuation of $1.75 trillion, as it means someone is paying 100 times annual revenue for a stake. Now that said, the price assumes that Starlink will keep growing, that Starship delivers, and that military contracts keep expanding, and the political environment that builds all of this holds steady. Now that is a lot of weight to put on a single set of assumptions. And whether those assumptions hold is not a question of rocket science, but one of politics.